last hours. Early in November, Ross left Paris to go down to the Riviera with his mother, for Reggie Turner had undertaken to stay with Oscar. Reggie Turner describes how he grew gradually feebler and feebler, though to the end flashes of the old humour would astonish his attendants. He persisted in saying that Reggie, with his perpetual prohibitions, was qualifying for a doctor. "When you can refuse bread to the hungry, Reggie," he would say, "and drink to the thirsty, you can apply for your diploma." Towards the end of November, Reggie wired for Ross, and Ross left everything and reached Paris next day. When all was over, he wrote to a friend, giving him a very complete account of the last hours of Oscar Wilde. It is too long and too detailed to be used here. Ross's letter should be read by the student, but several touches in it are too timid. Certain experiences that should be put in high relief are slurred over. In conversation with me, he told more and told it better. For example, when talking of his drives with Oscar, he mentions casually that Oscar insisted on drinking absinthe, and leaves it at that. The truth is that Oscar stopped the Victoria at almost the first café, got down and had an absinthe. 200 or 300 yards further on, he stopped the carriage again to have another absinthe. At the next stoppage, a few minutes later, Ross ventured to remonstrate. "You'll kill yourself, Oscar," he cried. "You know the doctors said absinthe was poison to you." Oscar stopped on the sidewalk. "And what have I to live for, Bobby?" he asked gravely. And Ross, looking at him and noting the wreck, the symptoms of old age and broken health, could only bow his head and walk on with him in silence. What indeed had he to live for, who had abandoned all the fair uses of life? The second scene is horrible, but is, so to speak, the inevitable resultant of the first, and has its own awful moral. Ross tells how he came one morning to Oscar's deathbed and found him practically insensible. He describes the dreadful loud death rattle of his breath, and says terrible offices had to be carried out. The truth is still more appalling. Oscar had eaten too much and drunk too much, almost habitually, ever since the catastrophe in Naples. The dreadful disease from which he was suffering, or from the after effects of which he was suffering, weakens all the tissues of the body, and this weakness is aggravated by drinking wine, and still more by drinking spirits. Suddenly, as the two friends sat by the bedside in sorrowful anxiety, there was a loud explosion. Mucus poured out of Oscar's mouth and nose, and even the bedding had to be burned. If it is true that all those who draw the sword shall perish by the sword, it is no less certain that all those who live for the body shall perish by the body, and there is no death more degrading. One more scene, and this the last, and I shall have done. When Robert Ross was arranging to bury Oscar at Bagneux, he had already made up his mind as soon as he could to transfer his body to Père Lachaise and erect over his remains some worthy memorial. It became the purpose of his life to pay his friend's debts, annul his bankruptcy, and publish his books in suitable manner, in fine, to clear Oscar's memory from obloquy, while leaving to his lovable spirit the shining raiment of immortality. In a few years he had accomplished all but one part of his high task. He had not only paid off all Oscar Wilde's debts, but he had managed to remit thousands of pounds yearly to his children, and had established his popularity on the widest and surest foundation. He crossed to Paris with Oscar's son, Vivian, to render the last service to his friend. When preparing the body for the grave years before, Ross had taken medical advice as to what should be done to make his purpose possible. The doctors told him to put Wilde's body in quicklime, like the body of the man in The Ballad of Reading Gaol. The quicklime, they said, would consume the flesh and leave the white bones, the skeleton, intact, which could then be moved easily. To his horror, when the grave was opened, Ross found that the quicklime, instead of destroying the flesh, had preserved it. Oscar's face was recognizable, only his hair and beard had grown long. At once Ross sent the son away, and when the sextons were about to use their shovels, he ordered them to desist, and descending into the grave, moved the body with his own hands into the new coffin in loving reverence. Those who hold our mortal vesture in respect for the sake of the spirit will know how to thank Robert Ross for the supreme devotion he showed to his friend's remains. In his case, at least, love was stronger than death. One can be sure, too, that the man who won such fervid, self-denying tenderness had deserved it, called it forth by a charm of companionship or magic of loving intercourse. End of chapter 26. Recording by Martin Geeson in Hazelmere, Surrey.